Hannah Jackson Matthews is an author, educator, content creator, and speaker who designs and delivers educational content for transracial adoptees, people raised by families whose race and ethnicity are different than their own, and their caregivers in order to better navigate race, embrace racial identity, and combat racism and white supremacy. She is an adult transracial adoptee, a biracial woman who was domestically and privately adopted as an infant by white parents. The racial difference between herself and her parents made navigating race, racism, and culture, along with developing a positive racial identity, and challenging. Her experiences and passion for education informed her first career as a ninth grade English teacher in North Philadelphia. Although she's no longer teaching in the traditional sense, Hannah continues to use the power of to use the transformational power of education as a means to combat racial and cultural ignorance within the context of transracial adoption. Welcome to the podcast, Hannah.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm excited for today's conversation.
me too. When I was reading your bio, I love that you were an English teacher. I was an English major.
I was also an English major, so there you
Were
go.
you?
Yes, I was not an English ed major. I was like a through and through English major, and somehow found myself in the classroom, which was like the last place I thought I was going to end up at. I thought I was going to, I don't know,
Interesting.
write and be an
Yeah.
academic or something, but there I was in North Philadelphia in the
Yeah.
classroom.
Good. Well, will you share your story of what led you to become a transracial adoptee champion? And I love that term.
Yeah, that's totally something that I coined. That's vague,
Yes.
but I feel like it describes what I do really well.
Mm-hmm.
And that is just like be a champion for people who have been transracially adopted. And
Yeah.
what led me to that was, well, I think it really just starts with me kind of being my own champion. Um,
Mm-hmm.
um, and that journey of finding my own voice and championing my own, you know, self and worth, and that all happened, and it really came to fruition in college for me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
when I, sorry, when I that all really came to fruition for me in college when I'm trying to think of like, I don't know. I guess I think once I discovered my interest in English and became a
Mm-hmm.
writer, um, when I took my first women's studies class, that like totally blew my entire mind off.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
because I mean, that was the first time I had heard voices like Audre Lorde and Bell Hooks and um, Patricia Hill Collins, and uh, I've always been a very observant. I was a very observant child,
Mm-hmm.
very perceptive, very sensitive, and I had a lot of experiences, but they were able to give me language
Mm-hmm.
um, for those experiences and really just affirm a lot of things that I had known were things that I was um, struggling with or um,
Mm-hmm.
challenges that I was facing, and really able to describe them in a way that resonated with all of the feelings that I was carrying to that point.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was like my sophomore year of college that I took that class,
Mm.
and it was like on a random whim. Like I just
Isn't
needed
that funny?
some to fill in this like elective spot,
Right.
and it was like, oh wow, I think that I've just discovered what I want to do,
Wow.
and so
Yeah.
yeah, I think that it starts me becoming a transracial adoptive champion starts with me being a champion of myself, and
Mm-hmm.
then living that out. For a
Mm-hmm.
while, I was a community organizer and activist in school, and really was able to not only find my own voice, but then like exercise it and develop a level of confidence in my
Mhm.
ability to champion myself and others. And
Right.
then I had a moment where I went back home to my hometown and I started to
Mhm.
see a lot of young transracial adoptees. Um, I grew up in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, which is a south central county, a little bit east of
Mhm.
Harrisburg, and most people know it for like the Amish people there or the
Uh-huh.
Mennonite people there. But basically, but
Right.
it does speak to like the very fundamentalist and like Christian evangelical um, community there, and so there's a lot of like um, due to those influences of that culture, there's a
Right.
lot of adoption. Now, that's not how
Mm.
my parents
Mhm.
entered adoption at all. That was not their the ideology
Mhm.
behind their choice to adopt, but it's very
Mhm.
common practice. And so when I went home, I saw a lot of transracial families, and I saw a lot of
Mm.
children that reminded me of myself.
Right.
And I had so far removed myself from my childhood self that
Yeah.
I kind of wanted to be able to help them along because a lot of the journey that I took to self actualization and positive racial identity, I did alone.
Mhm.
And I wanted to help if I could in any way.
Yeah.
So that's what made me want to be a champion. I just wanted to make other people's journeys to themselves really less
Right.
alone and less challenging, less difficult. I say less
Yeah.
isolating and less injurious.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, that's so important. I love that. I never knew, about, sort of the roots or the nuances about the adoption system, let alone like transracial or transnational adoption. And I remember first learning about it from Kaden Rose, who was on my podcast very early on episode 13. And we talked about it. It wasn't the only thing we talked about, but we talked about it. And ever since then, I've wanted to do an episode dedicated to this topic. I also learned from Will Bliss Kim, who also talked about adoption grief and loss from the perspective of transracial or transnational adoptees,
mm,
and just the problematic roots of the adoption system in general. So, um, and I'm thinking too, in the queer community, adoption comes up,
yeah,
as an option, because that's definitely, I think, especially talked about in the queer community in terms of family building.
yeah,
So I want to make sure that I'm supporting folks the best I can and making the decisions that can avoid causing more harm down the road. And I want to make sure that my listeners are equipped with the information that they need to make the best decisions for themselves and their families.
yeah.
Um, so the question that keeps going around in my head is I want to ask this question, but I know it's not a simple yes or no. But the question in my mind is like, is transracial or transnational adoption ever okay?
Mm.
And if so, under which circumstances? So I don't know if that's even answerable, but I wonder if you have thoughts around that,
I mean, yes.
or if we should dive into, yeah, I'm sure you do. Yeah. What are your
Yes, I
thoughts
mean,
around that?
yes, absolutely. I have thoughts on it, and
Yeah.
I've been asked this question a few times, and it's my first response is to say like I don't think it's an either or question. Um,
Sure.
so it's hard to
Yeah.
say yes or no. And if if someone is asking me this in the effort to be like, do you wish you weren't adopted? That's like a feat of
Right.
Olympic level imagination that I can't have.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and
Totally.
so um, that's not what that's not what am saying.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Um, and I do think this is probably an unpopular opinion, but I think that there are a lot of circumstances that make it very hard to engage with adoption, really in any sense, but especially
Mhm.
transnationally,
Mhm.
transracially. Just the systems of hierarchical power and control of this country, like it's really hard to engage with them without doing harm.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
I always kind of tend to lean towards, if you're looking for me to be like, yes, everything is fine and that's great, and you can do it without participating in problematicness, I'm never going to tell you
Mhm.
that. So
Right. Right.
I think
Yeah.
as it currently stands, um, we have, but I mean, Black folks need to reparations. They need to stop, um, targeting Indigenous and Black children. The child
Right.
welfare system needs to stop removing them from homes
Mhm.
unjustly. There's just so many things that, like, whether you want to or not, if you're engaging in the institutions and systems of adoption, be that privately or publicly, like through the child welfare system, there's just a practice and a legacy of practice that
Mhm.
is harmful to the people at the bottom of the intersectional, hierarchical systems of power and control. And so
Right.
um, I think until those systems are abolished and we treat people with humanity, it's gonna be hard
Right.
to be like. I think that my hope in saying a response like that is that people who are engaging with these systems will engage with them from a place of clarity about that. I'm not
Yeah.
saying that to elicit shame for people who have already participated, or fear for people who might desire to participate in them.
Mhm.
But I think that there needs to be a level of sobriety about what you're participating in, and then the
Yes.
level of responsibility that you hold to, because you benefited from a system that's harming others.
Right.
So as a result of that, I think that there is a restorative justice practice that you need to be taking moving forward, that should
Mhm.
be lived out. I think that
Mhm.
if you adopt a child transracially, you should be working tirelessly to abolish the systems and structures that make it necessary for children and families to be separated. Like, I think that it's like
Right.
a both
Yeah.
and, like,
Yeah.
you know, yeah.
Totally.
I think that's just how
Yeah.
we should care about each other generally. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. That's a beautiful answer to that question. And yeah, I think that's exactly right. Um, and like you said, it's like it has a legacy of oppression.
Yes.
And so whenever you're participating in anything that has a legacy of oppression, I love that you used the word sobriety to do it with sobriety, to know what you're engaging in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that adoption has had wonderful marketing, and that has made it seem
Right.
like it is a perfect solution, to a problem, to a problem like nobody can argue with, like, this is a great solution to this problem. But I think that if you look behind the curtain, it's
Mhm.
like you're gonna
Mhm.
see that it is maybe not as simple of a solution as we're making it out to be. Um,
Right.
and so,
Right. Exactly.
yeah, I think that, yeah, again, if you're going to engage
Yeah.
with it, know it's the same as anything. It's like there's no ethical consumption
Mhm.
under capitalism. Like you're
Right.
participating in the capital. If you adopt privately, you're going to be paying money. Like it's just like it's the
Mhm.
reality that we live within.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's.
Totally. It's so true. Yeah, so true. Yeah. With anything we engage when we're engaging in capitalism, yeah, it's
Yeah,
like
you live.
be
Yeah,
aware.
yeah.
Yeah.
You're, which we all are. We all are existing in,
Mhm.
capitalist, patriarchal, white supremacy. So it's like you just gotta do
Right.
your best, and when you know better, do better.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I love that you center transracial adoptees, or I think you've abbreviated to TRAs, which is I like that, in all your work. So all of your work centers TRAs, um, rather than centering the parents, the adoptive
Right.
parents. Will you explain the difference between fighting against transracial adoption versus fighting for transracial adoptees? And where did that stance come from?
The difference between fighting against, well, I think that when you center adoptive parents, when they hear
Right.
criticisms, um, or even just negative, what they perceive as negative experiences from
Mhm.
adoptees, they see those
Mhm.
adoptees as fighting against transracial adoption.
Mhm.
So, really, my stake, or like the thing that motivates me to do the work that I do, is not really have anything to do with the concept of transracial adoption. It's like I've
Mhm.
experienced transracial adoption as a transracial adoptee, and I know
Mhm.
the unique challenges that come as a result. And so my responsibility, the weight of responsibility that I feel is to protect transracial adoptees. And like, it's like, if that hurts your feelings about your transracial adoption, sorry. But I'm like, if this is really supposed to be this child centered practice, or like this altruistic practice that is for the benefit of children, why are
Right.
children suffering and we're ignoring it because we want to. I think that there needs to be more radical honesty about why people are pursuing adoption. I think people need to be more
Mhm.
honest about the fact that they really just want to have family, they want to have their own nuclear family. We talk about the impacts of individualism and paternalism, and how we have to have our own stuff. Now we could maybe solve that with some more
Right.
communal approaches to life. Anyway, I digress. But
Yeah.
basically, just I I'm really not that invested in the debate around whether or not we should traditionally adopt. I'm invested in the lived experiences of transracial adoptees, and I think that that should be,
Yes.
if you're engaging with traditional adoption, that should also be your highest priority. And if it's not, why are you adopting
Right.
traditionally?
Right. Yeah, got it. Yep, that makes a lot of sense. Totally. Um, as a mixed person myself, who was raised by a white mom in almost exclusively white communities with no contact from my dad beyond the age of 3, I feel like I can deeply emotionally relate to a lot of these stories that I hear of transracial adoptees and that feeling of lost identity and imposter syndrome. I love that you talk about that. Um, I would love to hear your thoughts on how TRAs can establish a strong sense of racial identity.
Hmm. I actually offer a service through my website called Identity Reclamation Coaching, and
I
that's
saw that. That's so cool.
to help support primarily adult transracial adoptees through the process of what you're talking about. Basically, um, identity crises around their racialized experience.
Mhm.
And um, when I first started offering that service, I was like, "We're just going to talk about like we're going to intellectualize and understand, you know, um, like I said, the systems that we exist within and how our identities are formed, and
Mhm.
kind of think about the ways in which us, oftentimes growing up in racial isolation in these very like white centric, white supremacist institutions, the impacts that has as a person of color navigating
Mhm.
in those spaces on your identity, We talk about familial socialization and how that's um, it looks differently when your parents aren't the same racial identity as you. So I entered it with like a very like intellectual, like we're just gonna work through and we're gonna
Right.
understand all these concepts. And then I realized like pretty early on that I really don't think it has very much to do with people not knowing those things.
Right.
I
Uh-huh.
think it really is a matter of people not feeling worthy enough
Mhm.
to belong to a particular identity group or identity groups or cultural groups.
Mhm.
And so it's become more of actually a practice of teaching them radical self acceptance
Mhm.
and self worth, a lot of like affirmations and really just giving space for those the complexities and understanding that positive racial identity is a, of course, there are ways that you can build it as a child, but it's a spectrum,
Mhm.
and you're going to have days where you feel secure, and then you're going to have moments where you feel a little bit less secure. Um, but I think when you realize that your worth doesn't need validation outside of yourself, it's a lot easier to validate and affirm those other aspects of yourself. And
Yeah.
so I try and focus more on that. And so that looks like more practices of like self compassion and
Mhm.
um, regulating, your nervous system and being able to find, comfort in your body. And so it's become a
Mhm.
lot like more, well, I guess wellness minded than maybe I had
Right.
initially anticipated. And we still intellectualize things, but I just
Mhm.
think I realized that like it's more than just like understanding these concepts. It's like being a person of color in a white supremacist centric space um, is going to do a number on your self worth.
Yeah.
So you just really just need a lot of like love and care and compassion
Yeah.
for yourself because
Right.
imposter syndrome is the idea that like all these people in this group know all this stuff and you don't,
Mhm.
right? And I
Mhm.
think that that comes from a very like that's not coming from a place of like compassion for. Think about like how are you going to know that stuff if you grew up in
Right.
racial isolation? How would you know things you can't know?
Right.
And so I
Yeah.
think when you're able to see that, first of all, that there are lots of people, it's a wide range of experiences. People have varied levels of knowledge and understanding,
Mhm.
but also like having that sense of compassion for yourself, knowing that you're holding yourself to an expectation uh, from an experience that you didn't have, couldn't have had.
Right.
Um, and so, yeah, I think it's just a matter of people need to experience belonging, a community that cares for them, accepts them, makes room for them, and they need to make room
Mhm.
for themselves. All those things
Mhm.
as well. And so, yeah, that's my biggest advice, I guess. I mean, um,
Yeah.
yeah. And then I think my positive personality came so much from people caring, like for communal care. When I went to college, I was embraced and like enveloped myself in a Black community and had a lot of wonderful friends and mentors and people who poured themselves into me and were willing to hear my questions and willing to let me say stupid stuff that I probably should have known or embarrassed myself or like so many things. But they were just like understanding and patient and kind and um, yeah. So I think that like I just try to extend that same gift I was given to
Right.
others now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Um, since some of my listeners could potentially be on the parenting end of this equation, um, will you talk about the racial stress that can occur with transracial parenting? What is it, and what are some ways that parents can navigate it?
Yeah. So racial stress is a concept that I learned during my graduate school studies. Um, uh, I got my master's in education when I was teaching in Philadelphia, and was able to study under Dr. Howard Stevenson. Um,
Mm,
and he developed. He actually didn't term racial stress. That was actually, I think, Sally Heron from Pepperdine University, but he developed a whole kind of like I don't even know what the word is, but what's the word? I don't know. But he developed, I guess maybe a pedagogy around this concept
mm,
for
mhm,
educators navigating racial stress in school. So interracial educational relationships and the stress that arise. And so he developed based off of the concept of racial stress, which is really just like any kind of stress that um, is going to come out of an encounter that
mhm,
is somehow within the dynamics of racism. So,
mhm.
and it's something that would you would perceive to overwhelm or exceed your ability to cope.
Okay.
And he uses a scale from like like a brisk walk to like a tsunami. Like, there's like a level of
Mhm,
how stressful you can feel it. And so from
mhm,
that mind frame, he then developed this mindfulness practice to help um, primarily white folks
mhm,
be able to uh, cope with racial stress because
mm,
his research showed that because white folks live most times in such racially homogenous communities, they
mhm,
have very limited what he calls racial literacy. And
mm.
so, um, and that is just like the experience that comes from having conflicts and just having differences of opinion. And that's why, if you're talking to somebody, bringing them, your opinion, and they get all red in the face and looks like they're, about to lose it. It's like
Right.
that's racial stress. And so
Interesting. Yeah.
he has developed a mindfulness practice in hopes that we can help work through some of the stresses.
Hmm.
And so then I do the same. I've now just taken that same practice and I just use it with adoptive parents and then
Right.
with caregivers. I've led a couple workshops with agencies
Mhm.
because it's something that occurs because people just don't have enough experiences
Right.
engaging with, like really engaging with people of racial difference. And so,
Yeah.
um, so yeah, that's racial stress. And then yeah, the practice is it's just a mindfulness practice. It's just being able to identify that you're experiencing racial stress, and then
Mhm.
you go through 3 steps or 4 steps. First one is calculate, which is you're gonna, on a scale of 1 to 10, rate how stressed you're feeling.
Mhm.
Then you'll communicate. Um, oh, sorry, no. Then you'll locate. Locate means you're gonna figure out where you're feeling it in your body. So,
Mm,
so
mhm.
I'm feeling stressed at an 8, and I'm feeling it in my chest, right? And then the next part is to communicate. So to talk about what um, images you might be seeing or what words you might be hearing. I might be
Mhm.
hearing like, "Oh, I'm under attack," or I might be seeing like a physical fight about to happen or something.
Right.
And then you're going to the last part is just to, I think, just to breathe and exhale. And the idea is that when you walk through those situations, especially afterwards, we're able
Mm-hmm.
to make better decisions for the next time that we have um, racially stressful encounters that aren't necessarily an underreaction where we're like it doesn't matter, and it's not an overreaction where we're making decisions that are dangerous or we
Right.
regret afterwards. And a part
Mm-hmm.
of the practice that we did when I was taking the class was we would role play. We would act out racially
Mm-hmm.
stressful encounters. It would be very tense, and
Wow.
then we would walk through the mindfulness practice.
Wow.
But again, the idea was, because of the level of racial literacy that white Americans have. And he said that racially stressful encounters can studies have shown in white Americans that they can have like phobic level responses.
Wow.
Um, and so, you know, it's kind of a little bit of that like exposure therapy, like, you know,
Right.
having that sense of practice facing the stressful um, encounter, than being able to make more informed and safe and thoughtful decisions when stressed.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
That's fascinating. I'm just thinking, like, what if cops, for example,
yes,
did this kind of training and then, were able to make better decisions, safer decisions?
absolutely. I think that a lot of
Yeah.
times when we see cops, or you think about like the situations where a cop has been like, "Oh, I thought it was my taser," and they've gotten it
Yeah,
down or something like
totally.
that. And I mean,
Right.
yeah, I mean that could just be, you know, a lie. But also,
Right, right.
like
Of course.
um, if you are scared, like that stress that
Mhm.
you're feeling it
Mhm.
as a tsunami, it's an unbearable level of stress. You
Mhm.
might, like, how could, like you said, um, practices like this, coping mechanisms like this, help prevent those kinds of egregious
Yeah.
incidents. And the same
Yeah.
thing for adoptive, white adoptive parents. If you have
Mhm.
this, you might not. You might be less likely to call the police on your foster child.
Totally.
Or
Yep.
you just be able to better navigate.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like raising the bar of feeling uncomfortable.
Yes,
To just sit with that uncomfortable feeling longer and then to calm yourself in that uncomfortable feeling
yes.
so that you can move forward.
I
Yeah.
mean, when you think about, I think you think about watching videos of racially stressful, or like an encounter like that. Let's say like an argument between two parties, and one of
Mhm.
them is a black woman and one of them is a white woman, and um, typically there's a huge difference in level of composure being held for a number
Yeah.
of reasons. But I think that
Right.
it speaks also to the practice of the frequency of of navigating racially stressful encounters and having to be mindful about
Right.
the decisions that you're making. And so it's I guess in some ways asking white folks to exercise that same level of mindfulness, so
Yeah.
that it's not all the falling, it's not all the burden of typically the people who are most harmed by racial violence. So,
Right.
yeah.
Right. So the burden doesn't fall on
Yes.
them to be the most mindful.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah. Totally. That's brilliant. And that makes so much sense. Um, I've been reading your digital workbook called Standing in the Gap. It's absolutely beautiful. It's made me cry a few times. What an incredible offering
Thank you.
for transracial adoptive parents that will ultimately serve transracial adoptees, right? Um, will you explain to our listeners what standing in the gap means versus shielding and sheltering? And I love the story you told in your book
Yeah.
about this.
Yeah. So the concept of standing in the gap for me came from, again, my hope was to illustrate for adoptive parents that there are experiences that transracial adoptees will have necessarily as a result of their adoption. And
Mhm.
so that for me was the concept of the gap. It's the
Mhm.
separation of space between, um, I mean, it can represent so many things, but it's the separation of space. It's what's lost as a result of um, your adoption. So that could be your culture, your first language, your first family. It
Mhm.
could be who you would have been had you stayed in your community of origin. It
Right.
just represents the depth of loss of what's lost
Mhm.
necessarily as a result of adoption. And so I
Right.
think a lot of times adoptive parents waste a lot of time and energy trying to figure out how they can prevent that gap from happening
Mhm.
or fill
Yeah.
the gap in.
Mhm.
And my hope with the workbook is to just be like, this is it exists. And so our job, your job as caregiver, our job as community members who care for and about traditional adoptees is
Mhm.
to um, acknowledge the fact that it exists and then um, help them to navigate um, the journey that they need to make um, around and through and over that gap. Um,
Right. Right.
and in the beginning, I was talking about the difference between standing in the gap and shielding and sheltering. And I feel like a lot of times adoptive parents hope to protect their children from experiencing any pain or harm or discomfort. Um,
Sure.
and but I had kind of thought of this imagery of, and a lot of times when they're doing that, they're shielding um, themselves from having to feel the pain of their child being in pain. Is they end up
Right.
kind of using their own child as the shield because ultimately, regardless of if I don't know you're trying to eliminate the sources of potential harm, they're
Mhm.
out there.
Mhm.
So it's just like
Yeah.
you can't protect them from it.
Mhm.
When families of color are socializing their children, they're not trying to protect them from racism. They're trying to prepare them for it.
Mm. Mhm.
Because um, shielding and sheltering is about keeping you from the reality that exists because
Mhm.
it's uncomfortable. And for me, protecting and preparing is about um, a level again of sobriety of the reality of what you exist within, and then helping
Mhm.
you to be as prepared and as protected and as um, safe and secure as you can be given um, those circumstances. And I
Right.
think when we try to protect ourselves from acknowledging that reality, the reality eventually ends up striking someone, and that someone, if it's not you doing the work to protect your um, child or the child in your care, it's gonna be them having to do it on their own.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and so I think we would be much better. First of all, we would be much better off if we would just divert our energy to away from trying to deny what exists or trying to, I don't know, pretend like it's you can somehow exempt your child from it because of your experiences or your level of privilege or access or wealth, um,
Mhm.
and just acknowledge it. Because from that place of honesty, then you can um,
So I think the story that you told, was it about prom? About you going to prom? I felt like that really illustrated.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember
I
it?
can't remember it. I'm sorry. Um,
That's okay if you don't
no,
remember.
I talked about going to prom. I'm
And I
trying.
think another parent, adoptive parent, asked you, "How can I stop this from happening to my kid?"
Oh, yes, 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 yes. So I talked
Do you
about,
remember?
yes. Thank you for refreshing
Okay.
my. So yes, I tell the story of how I did not go to prom. Yes, so I tell in order to explain shielding and sheltering, I tell the story of prom, and I did not go to prom because I was not asked to go to prom
Mhm.
by a date, and um, I think I talk about how like I felt like very undesirable growing
Mhm.
up because again I was in like I predominantly white school. I was one of
Mhm.
probably a handful of black girls um,
Right.
at my school, and yeah, we just I didn't it was not sought after as a partner, and
Yeah.
so um, yeah, I didn't end up going to prom, and I just shared those feelings of kind of just realizing that wasn't gonna right just it wasn't gonna be a reality for me. And there
Mhm.
was an adoptive parent who had asked me, like, how do I make sure that my child isn't you, essentially?
Right, right,
And um, yeah, I just feel like that's like not the right question we should be asking.
right.
Um, yeah, I mean, I'm blanking a little bit about what I said, but I feel like it's not the right question that we should be asking. I think about like why was I in that school?
Mhm.
Why was I feeling like I was so undesirable and unattractive? Um,
Right.
yeah, I don't know.
Totally.
And yeah, I think
I'm gonna pull it up right now,
yes,
like, 'cause I
thank you.
wanna
I'm
see
sorry. I'm
the wo
like I'm blanking.
No,
I wrote that
no, totally. I just thought
transition.
the wording was, like, so spot on how
Thank
you
you.
worded it. I wanna find it here. Let's see. Um, she genuinely asked, "How do I make sure this does not happen to my daughter?" Um, Whereas a parent who stands in the gap says, "What can I do to support her if and when this does happen?"
Mm.
And the critical questions: why doesn't my daughter have a date to the prom? How is she feeling about it? What is she telling herself as a result? I loved that. I just thought that was such a clear example, like understanding of instead of being like, how can I
Yes,
stop this from
yes,
happening to her? It's more like, what do I do when this does happen, or if this does happen, and then how do I ask her how she feels about it?
yes,
Like,
absolutely.
like getting in there and standing in the gap, like
Absolutely.
you said.
Yes. Yes. How
Yeah.
do I walk with her alongside this
Right.
experience versus how do I make sure that she, and I think that that's the question in essence. I feel like I get that question over and over again.
Yeah.
Whenever I describe any challenging experience that I've had, it's always the how do
Mhm.
I make sure that that doesn't happen for my
Right.
kid? And it's like,
Right.
oh, I need you to be approaching with like, what will you do if and when this does happen?
Right.
And how are you going to walk, like I said, stand in the gap? How are you going to walk alongside? How are you going to prepare and protect them? Uh,
Mhm.
how are you going to walk alongside them um, in that experience instead of trying
Totally.
to prevent that experience from happening? I feel like
Right.
sometimes I say this stuff and I'm just like, I feel like this is just generally like how we should just parent and care for each
Right.
other. Like,
Yeah.
it's
I was
like,
thinking that. Yeah.
it's like,
I was thinking that. I was like, this still applies. A lot of this applies to parenting in general,
yeah, I
of
think that
yeah.
you can't prevent your children from experiencing hard things.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so rarely I feel like,
And if you do, and even if you do prevent them from experiencing hard things, it can actually be detrimental.
yes, because
Yeah.
then what happens when they go off to college? And then they're,
Right.
and then they're on their own. Because that happens to a lot. There are a lot of transracial adoptees that I speak to that
Mhm.
they can't think of an experience of they they probably did have experiences of like racial whatever, but like they can't
Right.
think of one until they were out of the home, and it was like this very like
Interesting.
jarring, like, oh wow, I'm not like everyone else.
Right.
And I'm
Interesting.
like, that's weird, because not weird, but that's like I feel like I'd known I was different. There's no way I was
Right.
not aware I was so different. But at the same time, like I think
Right.
that yeah, maybe you are successful in making them feel like everyone's the same and there's no difference. And what
Right.
happens when they're treated differently? What
Mhm.
does that do to, like I said, what are they telling themselves?
Mhm.
Um, what are they
Yeah,
saying about
totally.
themselves as a result of this experience?
Right. Yeah.
And no, yeah, I don't think rarely people are asking those questions.
Mhm.
Yeah, and
Totally.
there's just so many things. I'm just like, also, I just feel like as parents, as people, we just need to just be kinder to one another. And
Absolutely.
I'm just like, I think that some of
Yeah.
that also just comes from shame. People are afraid to find out answers that are unsavory because then they blame themselves, or
Yes.
they feel like, oh, my
Yeah.
child is not happy or didn't have the best everything, and so I'm a bad
Right.
parent. It's like a
Right.
bad parent is unwilling to, like, I don't know. I'm just like, I feel like in our attempts to not hear that, we kind of become bad parents.
Right. Right. Totally. Yeah.
Anyway, so
Yeah.
there you go. There you have
Uh,
it.
yes. So something that brought instant tears to my eyes, and I'm a crier, so I cry a lot. So this is
Mhm.
like one of the ways I, express emotion,
Yeah,
especially when I'm reading something. Um, was when I saw on your website you have different like webinars available and different like printable downloads and stuff. And one of them was a birthday printable for kids for racial adoptees.
yeah,
Um, and I just started crying. I was like, wow, I never thought about birthdays being a day that could be triggering, or a day for, that would bring about really big feelings
yeah.
for TRAs. But of course they are. So will you share about why that could be for our listeners?
Absolutely. Yeah, birthdays are can be a whole myriad of experience, like emotional experiences for adoptees, even to
Yeah.
just beyond transracial adoptees, but adoptees, foster youth, because it's a reminder of your birth. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and for someone like me as an infant, someone who was adopted as an infant, like that was one of the last times I was with my mom. So it's
Right.
like
Right.
that's um, so there's that. There's the reminder of your birth, and sometimes there's a lot of mystery about what happened and where were you, and you know how
Mm-hmm.
was what were the feelings on that day? Like, were people excited? Were people sad? Were people
Right.
scared? So there's that. There's a reminder of birth. There's also, for some adoptees, they don't know when they were born.
Mm-hmm.
Their birthday is a guess, or
Right.
like it might be the day that they were. It might have, sometimes adoptive parents will make it the day they were adopted. So then there's like
Right.
this disconnect of like, this day is not what what we're saying it is.
Right.
Or I don't know when I was born, or I don't feel particularly connected to this day.
Mm,
Um, so there's like the reality of like, the reminder of your birth and the
mhm.
separation. There's the reminder of sometimes, you not knowing when you were born. Um, if you're not in reunion or you didn't have an open adoption, there's that reminder of that continued separation. You might wonder, does my mom think about me on my birthday? Like, does she remember? Um, so yeah, birthdays can be heavy for adoptees.
Mm-hmm.
I'm um, I don't know if it's just because I'm just an avoidant person sometimes, but I think that I'm one of the adoptees that like I love my birthday. But
Oh,
I also like know when I was born, and I know where I was born, and I know what time I was born.
right.
Um, I know a little bit about my story, and I
Mm-hmm.
have for a long time now. Not a ton, but enough to feel
Mm-hmm.
like that's my day.
Right.
And then I have an elder brother who's also adopted from Seoul, South Korea, and he's shared with me that he um, doesn't. He when I shared about birthdays, he reached out to me privately and was like, "I never really realized, but like I don't. I've always kind of not cared that much about birthdays, and
Mm-hmm.
and he's like, I never really thought about why, but like, yeah, I think that makes sense. Because again, for him,
Yeah.
his birthday, it would have been an estimation. Um,
Gotcha.
uh, it's just totally different experience.
Yeah.
Like an international adoption, or if it's um, my birth mother chose my parents, and
Okay.
like there was um, just a
Right.
lot more, feel a lot more, I guess. I hope control and like consent in the situation. Sometimes with the other ones, it's hard. Like it's just harder. I think that we carry some of that with us
Yeah.
generationally, and so
Yeah.
in an effort to honor that, I created a resource for kids, and it's literally just like a picture of a child celebrating their birthday, and I have like little faces that they can put in to kind of see all the different emotions. So like this one face might be a face of someone who looks sad or confused or surprised or happy, just for them to be able to see that like there are lots of ways to feel on your birthday, and also
Yeah.
inviting their caregivers to into that conversation of I think we expect children to just enjoy their birthdays and to be
Right.
happy
It's
and
your
we got
birthday.
cake,
Yay.
and
Right.
it's like
Yeah.
making room for the reality that this might not that you might be feeling lots of different feelings on today,
Mm-hmm.
and that's okay. Um, and it doesn't mean that you have to make birthdays a super somber day, but you
Right.
can you can make room for both. You can
Yeah.
say like,
Totally.
yeah. So,
Yeah. That's what I love so much about the work that you do is it's holding complexity and it's having room for, all sorts of feelings, at the same time where it's like, yeah, it's not just, binary. There's not a binary there. If this is right, this is wrong. It's like there's just so much complexity and nuance to the whole thing.
absolutely down with all the
Yeah.
binaries.
Yes, exactly. Same.
Yes.
Uh, no more
Yes,
binaries, please.
just throw them out, all of them.
Yes.
But yeah, really. Uh,
Uh,
yeah.
well, I have enjoyed this conversation so much. I love how reflective you are and how you do slow down and really think about things. I felt it during this conversation and it feels so nice to just like take that time and that peace and really reflect. So thank you for that energy that you brought to our conversation
Of
today.
course. Of course. Yeah. I feel like, this again, the systems that we exist within, they're gonna tell you you gotta be go, go, go,
Right.
urgent, urgent, urgent.
Yeah. And
When
we don't have to
we
do
don't
that.
have to do that.
Yeah.
One of the best ways that we can honor
Yeah.
our humanity is literally just slow
Yes. Yes. So how can people find you and support you and buy all your things?
down. You can you can find me. Most people find me through Instagram, and my
Hmm.
Instagram is at Hannah Jackson Matthews, my whole name.
Hmm.
Um, and then you can also find me at my website, which is um, hannahjmatthews.com.
Okay.
And yeah, you'll also find my products and services on my site. There are several different options. Like if you're interested in products, you just would go to, I think it just says products. If you're interested in booking like a consultation or coaching conversation, that would be underneath, like coaching and mentoring. I also do speaking engagements. And I'm forgetting something. Oh, I also lead or host a local support group for transracial adoptees in the
Oh,
greater
yeah.
Minneapolis, St. Paul area, which is where I'm located.
Okay.
So if anyone is interested in, if anyone is a transracial adoptee of color,
Hmm.
um, right now the group is entirely composed of women and femmes,
Hmm.
but everyone is welcome. Um,
Cool.
but
Yeah, I saw a picture of y'all the other day that you posted on Instagram.
yeah,
It looks so fun, and
it's really
what a
great.
great
It
group.
really is wonderful. And
Yeah.
so yeah, we just try to make time for a space of shared like that affinity of shared lived experience. And
Yeah.
I like to make space for our feelings as adoptees, and but I also feel like a lot of adoptees support groups can be very like, I don't know, they can be a little bit doom and gloom for me, and so I'm like, I also
Uh-huh.
want us to like have space for
Have fun.
community and joy, and
Yeah.
for it
Yeah.
that not to be all of who we are. Um,
Right.
so I like
Right.
to do things. We're not just always sitting around table talking. Next month we're gonna make candles together.
Oh,
So
fun.
yeah, just like I like to try and do um, different things so we can really just
Yeah.
have
I
that
love
genuine
that.
community.
Yeah, that's so important.
Yeah.
That's I love that so much. Well, all of those links that you just mentioned will be in the show notes for people to easily access. And thank you so much, Hannah. I loved this
Oh,
conversation.
great. Thank you again for having me. It was great.
Absolutely.